There he is.
Hello.
Hi.
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 What's so funny? What did I do?
I like how, this is one of those things where we want to be the same head size
Yes.
because it's about equality, even
I'm
though
trying to match your head size. I think you could take the lead.
that's really hard. I have to take many steps back for
Am I
that.
okay? Is this all right? I don't. We never really do stuff like this. So you tell me what to do.
Yeah, this is called multimedia.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. I usually am just if it doesn't come out of a typewriter, I'm useless.
You could that could be a thing, right? You could collect. Who is it? Is it Tom Hanks who has old typewriters?
Yeah, maybe.
Hey, Devin Peaty.
It's a hobby. Yeah, it's a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll wait just a couple more minutes for more people to join before we kind of get into the juicy stuff. But how are you doing?
I'm good, Nick. How are you?
Good. I was just saying, I was doing a test video earlier. I got to do a 2-up with Zachary from his airplane, which was cute.
Cool.
I guess he's on his way here, huh?
I believe so, yes.
Aw. But what was the thing that I was thinking about? That I don't remember.
What shoes are you wearing, Nick?
See, I knew you were going to ask me that. So I'm in my house,
Uh-huh.
and I'm Korean.
Okay.
So that means I'm wearing Linty Undefeated limited edition house slippers.
You still have cool slippers. You still have cool slippers.
That's right. That's right.
Happy March 1st, by the way.
Thank you. Happy March 1st. Yeah, it's Korean Independence Day. I have a jacket. It's across the room. I'm not going to show it right now. That has a special Korean flag on the back. It's called On's flag. It's kind of the independence sort of rebel flag for Koreans during this occupation time. Mm-hmm. So I'll be wearing that. I've been wearing it a lot anyway, but I'll be wearing it especially today for Korean Independence Day, 100th anniversary, the centennial.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you.
Yeah.
What are you wearing on your feet?
I have the Adidas Museum, the Pharrell Adidas Aditops.
Oh, nice.
They're a little beat up, but
Look at you.
Yeah, I'm trying. Well, it's funny, it feeds back to this thing. I know we're going to talk about deadstock and stuff, but I'm sort of well, we'll save it for that, but I've been going there a lot, and it has kind of seeped into my brain a little bit.
It can happen. Sneakers,
Yeah.
There's an interesting parallel between sneakers and coffee that that Ian and I have connected on, Ian at Deadstock Coffee in Portland, as well as with a lot of other people, which is, coffee and sneakers, ubiquitous, very common, nothing special, unless you want it to be, and it can be very special, and there's a whole, connoisseurship, there's a sort of a fandom, you can get obsessed with it, and you can get really into it. I don't, however, have 60 pairs of coffee beans in my closet right now. That wouldn't really make sense. Not for coffee, but yeah.
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 Are we doing this on your account or on the Wrecking Ball account? I wasn't sure. When you did it the other day, you did it on the Wrecking Ball, right?
On the other day, I did it on the Wrecking Ball account. But this is on mine. I mean, we'll mix it up. I know what I was going to say. I was saying before on my test video that I like listening to podcasts. I had the first coffee podcast in the industry back in 2005. I struggle to try to produce podcasts now because I don't have time to edit. But I like having conversations about coffee industry stuff and all things coffee. And so I'm wondering if this kind of live stream format is going to be better for me to put more content out there because this is more natural for me.
Yeah.
In fact, my old podcast was really essentially this, but in audio form. And I guess we could just cut, clip the audio, rip the audio, and just upload that as a podcast as well sometimes.
You certainly could.
Yeah.
Or you could work with an editor. Collaboration is
Oh, no, I can't.
You
I
can't?
couldn't. I'm too much of a control freak to be able to give that to somebody else to do. I've tried it, and it's it's one of those things where it's like I don't like this. I don't like this edit. But anyway, we've waited for people to get online. Again, we'll download this video and upload it to YouTube as well. Just because again, it's a fun way to put content out there. But so I'm going to start the YouTube video at this point and introduce Jordan Michelman, founder and co-founder and editor of Sprudge.com.
Hello.
And I think most of the people watching know what Sprudge is. How do you describe Sprudge to people, Jordan, when you talk about it?
It is the world's most popular coffee publication by readership. We write about culture, we write about tech, we write about the industry, we write about new shop openings. We sort of cover all of it top to bottom, like how a good food publication writes about food, or like how a good wine publication writes about wine. We also have one of those, a wine website that we started almost 2 years ago, and that's called Sprudge Wine.
Right. And you run Sprudge with your partner and friend, childhood friend, Zachary Carlson, who I think might still be watching.
Could be. I think he's, Zachary and I are in divide and conquer mode today, so he's running around at some events, and I have some other events that I'm going to later in the weekend. We've known each other since we were kids. We met when we were 14, and after high school, Zachary went and kind of fell into coffee world in no small part due to you and your cafe in Washington, D.C. at the time, which was very sort of, I don't want to say like proto third wave, but on the first crest of the third wave, let's say.
Oh. I'd say second, but that's okay.
2005, 2006. It's still pretty early. Most of these bean teens, like some of these bean teens weren't even alive yet, Nick. So it's okay.
Zachary's first day working for me, he was trying to sit on my lap by the end of that first day. And I'm going to leave that story there. It's not what you think, but it also is slightly what you think. And we'll talk about that story another time. The reason we're here today, I mean, Jordan, so many things to talk about that we could talk about, but we really wanted to focus today on tastecooking.com, taste for short, that so I know that you had a part in this overall kind of coffee. I guess it's an online magazine, so they're calling this a coffee issue.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the way it started, where it came from, and your involvement.
Sure. So Taste is a food and culinary culture website that's based out of New York City. It is the twinned website to Punch, which is like a drinks and beverage culture website. And they're both owned and published by Penguin Random House out in New York. And when Zachary and I put out a book last year called The New Rules of Coffee, it too was published through an imprint of Penguin Random House called 10 Speed Press, which is based in the Bay Area but is part of the wider under the wider hub of Penguin out in New York. And so as part of promotional touring and stuff for the book, we did this event with Taste, which is a little bit of like a down the hall kind of a connection. Like you have to book on Penguin, so you can go do the thing with the Penguin website, and it kind of makes sense. But we got to meet some of the people involved with it, including this guy called Matt Rodbard, who is the editor-in-chief for Taste, and he hosted us on the podcast and interviewed Zachary and I at the Counterculture Training Center in Soho. And we had a good time. It was really fun, and while we were all there hanging out, he kind of was like, hey, I'm going to be working on this thing next year. Let's talk more about it if you ever think you'd want to kick in on it. And I said, sure. I like to do freelance. I do freelance writing in addition to Sprudge work here locally in Portland for the Willamette Week, which is our alt-weekly newspaper here, and also for Portland Monthly Magazine, which is like our glossy monthly like city magazine. Every city, typically, most cities have one.
Right.
And, so we got to kind of talking, and it kicked into like him saying, hey, would you want to do a story or two? And we started to kind of talk about it. And then eventually, after I turned some stuff in, he kind of was like, hey, listen, we'd love to have you work with us on some editing stuff too, and be able to take a look at things and kind of come at it Sprudge very by accident has been, publishing about coffee every day for a decade, and so a lot of times when other publications that don't publish every day about coffee kind of want to take an approach to it, there is stuff that they like have an interesting viewpoint on, but there's also sometimes stuff that they might like get wrong or like not know enough to know that they didn't get it right or whatever. And Matt and Taste, also the senior editor at Taste, Anna Hetzel, to their credit, we're smart and we're like, hey, let's bring in a ringer basically to like make sure we don't do the thing that most places do, which is like get a bunch of and I was that ringer. So,
That's great.
So, it ended up with me doing a spotlight piece on Deadstock Coffee here in Portland, Oregon, and then a kind of omnibus 10 big things in coffee piece that helps sort of lead off the content package. And then I worked with Matt on writing the intro and worked as an editor for, it ended up being another 5 or 6 pieces that I got to do some editing work on.
Yeah, cool. Well, what inspired me reaching out about doing this conversation was that I was, reading it for the 4th time and just thinking about how it's a great list. There's a lot to talk about here. I don't just agree with everything in here, and I think that would make it a good conversation. Yeah. So let's dive right in. So again, you all can find it after the watching this video, or you can follow along, but I actually figured out a way to put some of these up on the thing. So let's just dive right in, shall we? Sure. So you can't see this, but everyone else can. So the number 1, it's on the screen. The future of coffee farming is female. So talk about that a little bit.
So this was actually something that came in. This list got built out collaboratively with the team at Taste. So they kind of were like, you're going to do this omnibus. We'd love to have, hit 3 or 4 of these bullet points and then add more stuff from your own perspective. And this was one of the ones that they were like, listen, we want to do this thing about, we want you to talk a little bit about gender equity and specifically how it's happening in, like on the producer side. This is something that we have published on, dozens of times now at Sprudge. So there's sort of that bank of knowledge and like to get a sense of like where to point people at or whatever. And from a writing perspective, then it sort of becomes like, how do you synthesize like this thing that you've published about, from a bunch of different bylines, maybe 20 different times? How do you do that in 150 words? So, there's a lot of different people to kind of get to pull out in this stuff. I think for the purposes of approaching this like it being somebody's first article they ever read about fancy coffee or whatever, being able to pull out people who, to coffee people, are sort of name brands, people like Aida Battier or the work that they do at La Palma Il Toucan, to pull that out and be like, this stuff is interesting, go and look at it. And these are people who, through just being in this world for a decade, I've had a chance to like meet, hang out with. I've met the Caballero, Marisabel
Caballero.
Yeah. We've met a couple of different times at various conferences. I've cupped coffee.
That's Finca El Puente in Honduras, among other farms now.
And those are amazing. Definitionally, amazing coffees, and have been for more than a decade. I was once given a really good piece of advice by a writer who I respect very much, who told me that some stories are a marathon and some stories are a sprint, and your job becomes trying to figure out which is which and like using your time and brain space accordingly. And for this is sort of like a series of little mini sprints. So, but I did come with that headline, although the section sort of is like, hey, this was chosen to be cheeky because it's not a future thing, it's happening right now. There's this really amazing women right now.
Well, I hear you on that. That makes a lot of sense. This is the first one on the list. How do you decide which one goes first?
That's a collaborative thing. This got turned in as a draft, and I don't even remember. Maybe it was first when it got turned in, but Matt and Anna chopped it up and sort of went through and figured out
Got it.
supposed to be what. And I gave a little bit of feedback on that toward the end, but that's definitely like the work that I do most hours of the day for Sprudge is as an editor for other people's stuff. But
Right.
when you are doing freelance or you're writing for another publication, you have to put on the other hat. And some of that means when you file your thing, you're done. You know what I mean? It's not your job to sweat every last little thing up till the moment it runs, and then even after sometimes to like make it perfect. You know, you
Right.
get to kind of be the hired gun, and like that's going to be your approach. So stuff like that, I gave it to them and said, do what you want. You know, do what you want. I trust you.
Right. I mean, I personally don't have a ton to say about this particular one on the list. It is interesting that if you ask a lot of people who can name any coffee farmers to name some coffee farmers, like you said, you know, Ida Batlle and Marisol Caballero would come to to mind for a lot of people, and the few others that you can think of. I mean, it's interesting thinking about counterculture's role in that. As being the folks who really first engaged. I know first engaged Ida Batlle. That was Ida came to prominence. I want to say 2003 at the first El Salvador Cup of Excellence, where I think she was they took number one and like two different ones. It was Finca. Crap, I'm drawing a blank. The one that's named after the mountain in
Kilimanjaro.
Kilimanjaro. What's wrong with me today? I didn't get enough sleep. I think Kilimanjaro took number one, and all that coffee went to I think Solberg and Hansen in Norway.
Sure.
And then there was the other Los Alpes that went to I think Wataru coffee in Japan. Anyway, and then they had a third farm that was the one that counterculture started working with, and that's kind of where that came from. And I think with the point being, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I do think it's interesting that some of the most famous coffee farmers are women in a segment that we know is not women dominated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it makes me wonder why that is. If it's I mean, those two people that I can think about, when you think about them, they're extraordinary, interesting stories in the coffee industry, but it still makes me wonder, like, you know, reflect on why that happens to be true about that segment when it's not really true about any other kind of part in the value chain.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could argue that some of the most famous baristas are women. I think you could argue that there's some very prominent coffee companies that are owned by women. In the case of the producers in particular, you know, I think that some of it goes back to just their coffee is fucking good, and that's why it's a thing, you know? Like
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Cool. Well, again, each one of these things we could go on forever. The second one, I really love this one. Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I gotta do this on the screen.
Yeah.
Do that, and then boom. Number 2, ready to drink is ready to fail.
Yeah. Well, so this is kind of my hot take, and you know, there's another article that's in the Taste content package that was written by a woman out in New York, very, very talented pro writer out in New York named Elizabeth Dunn, who did sort of an investigation into here's some stuff that's happening with RTD from kind of a New York perspective. She goes and talks to like the Grady of Grady's and sort of looks at all that stuff, and then I have the thing in my list of being like, I think it's maybe a bubble that's going to burst. And I guess it's just because I don't know, you know, I felt like there was a lot of really exciting stuff getting ready to kind of happen in that world maybe 2 years ago, and now it feels all really samey. I feel like when I go to the stores and I look at the products, they look kind of samey. I feel like when I drink the products, they drink kind of samey.
Right.
And I don't think cold coffee is going away, not by a long shot. But I think the idea of like a $9 billion RTD coffee market, that seems a little bubbly to me.
Right. I'm with you on that. And it's not, you know, a lot of people know me on Twitter as talking a lot of shit about cold brew, but it's not even really about that for me. I guess it is a little bit related to why I'm not a big cold brew fan to begin with. But when you look at that RTD, especially the cold brew segment, I'm wondering how much I can say or not say. I guess I'll just preface this by saying it's rumors and hearsay, but Blue Bottle here in the Bay Area, was acquired by Nestle about a year and a half ago, and is a big part of that value for their company was the RTD cold brew stuff, and I've heard rumors that business for them is struggling. It's a little bit, at least it's flat, so to speak. It's not growing like they thought it would grow at this point. And, I think that it reminds me a little bit of when I talk to people about romantic relationships, about how we all know people, or we might be one of those people ourselves who really wants that kind of new, fresh, just starting to date, what people call honeymoon period type relationship. And then once that wears off, you kind of on to the next sort of hot new thing. And that, when I talk to friends about that, I say, if your judgment on the value of a car, for instance, is by its newness, then that's not, no one would think that was a good way to value a car. But what people do that with relationships, I think with this cold brew segment, I think for a lot of people, they try something, and there are things about it that they like, because coffee is awesome that way. As I like to say, coffee is so amazing. You can fuck it up 100,000 different ways, and people will still line up every day for a cup. Okay, that's a mouthful. But the point is that if being kind of the hot new thing is what makes you cool, then what happens when the new hot new thing comes along? Is that sustainable as a business? That's something you can bank on. I know in the business world, there's that first to market kind of thing. It's like, if you're first and really establish yourself, put your flag down, you own that category, then that's great. But, it was way crowded even coming into it, right?
Right. I think that RTD does a couple of things that, from a financial bookkeeping perspective, are kind of a golden goose for coffee, right? It's scalable and packable and shippable in a way that coffee feels kind of at cross purposes too. And it solves the fundamental issue, or at least partially solves the fundamental issue, at the heart of roasted coffee, which is that once you roast coffee, it's this message will self-destruct date at the end of it, because coffee degrades, and so that is also impedes scalability. So if what you would like to do is to be able to say, okay, well, our company is going to sell this many more and this many more and this many more, and it's going to be in every part of the world, and it's going to be an endlessly scalable thing, which the money people then coffee gives you cold brew allows for the widgeting of that concept in coffee. However, it's predicated on the idea that 9 billion is going to get to 12 billion, it's going to get to 15 billion, it's going to get to 20 billion. And I will be happily proven wrong when, every person in America has got 20 cold brews in their fridge at all times, and it really does get to that much money. Totally. But for me, do I see that being necessarily what happens? I don't know if I necessarily see that being what happens. I'm wrong all the time too, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my head, especially lately, and we'll talk about this more later, is kind of in that sort of investor startup kind of scaling mode nowadays more than ever. And with that RTD segment, people are looking for who's going to be the next Snapple, who's going to be the next Arizona iced tea. And when there's so many, again, players, out of all the cold brew brands, which one is best poised to kind of be something like that? What's something new that they've come out with? All the players that showed up 2-3 years ago with RTD products, what's their refresh in 2018, 2019? I haven't seen anything interesting. I haven't seen anything keeping people's attention. And in fact, most of that packaging that seemed kind of cool and edgy when it showed up, now it looks kind of old and busted. Yeah. And so, needless to say, I'm with you on ready to drink is ready to fail. I also agree with you that it's not the ready to drink element that's the issue. It's maybe the cold brew kind of thing. But who knows? Maybe something else will come along. I know that people a lot of times we're wondering, well, can you do a flash brew RTD? And the answer is not really. Even though people think they can, unless people can figure out a chemical way to stabilize the beverage, there's certain chemical changes that happen with the ice brew, flash brew. In other words, for those who don't know these, like the industry lingo, brewing hot and chilling it immediately as opposed to brewing it cool or cold over hours. It starts tasting like cold brew after a couple days.
Some people love that smooth cold brew flavor, Nick.
Some people do. And that's okay, and they're allowed to like it. And about that, what's my little phrase or whatever you want to call it is, there are people out there who really like getting kicked in the crotch. They love it. They legitimately love it. They're allowed to love it, and I'm allowed to say it's bad for you. And those can coexist. Okay, next, number 3, coffee subscriptions are absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Are they though?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I have a couple of coffee subscriptions that I'm getting here regularly in Portland, and I really like when they show up and come. I really like that cafe box from Oslo because
who doesn't like things from Oslo though?
No, but it's not about that. I'm really not like a Scandi fuckboy. Like I'm not. That's not my thing. But some of those roasters.
Have you looked in the mirror? No.
Like Kopi is really good. Like I like getting that coffee regularly. I like having a chance to try different stuff. And I think that what Tony and Sumi are doing with Yes Please is really interesting and cool too. And I don't know if it's like
I need to get on that subscription. I really want to see this little newspaper zine thing.
It's a must subscribe. I really think so. And the coffee's delicious. Like especially I'm on record 30 different ways of being like a home batch brew person. Like I have a little Mocha Master and I'm just obsessed with it still.
Home batch brew, is that what we're calling it now?
Well, whatever. What do you want me to call it, Nick? You tell me.
I mean, 2 years ago people were calling it like, well, I have a pour over machine.
Oh no, I never called it that.
Yeah.
You never saw pour over machine on Spread. I promise you, you never.
No, but the equipment companies did. Like Ratio was marketing as like, oh, we're like an automated pour over.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but I think that what they've kind of put together is like the ultimate like it's just perfect in like your Breville or your broad or you know what I mean, like your little like a home brewer like that. I think and the zine stuff that they're doing is really interesting. I mean, it's super interesting and it's such a like
very LA.
It manages to be a coffee project that is also kind of a very personal like art project, and I'm sucking for stuff like that. I think it's great.
In this, you mentioned Cafe Box, but you didn't talk about some of the other ones like Trade and Mista Box and things like that. But I mean, would you put that in the same category?
Yeah, I think those companies also offer interesting stuff, and they're kind of coming after different segments of who they're trying to reach or who they're trying to kind of go to, I mean, I really think that the ones that I chose to pull out are the ones that I kind of think seems like they're the most interesting right now, but it's part of the idea of being like there's really a lot of these coffee subscription options that are out there. And there's always sort of been, individual subscriptions from companies too, which gives you the opportunity to really get to the bottom of what an individual brand is doing in terms of their approach to sourcing and roasting and how all that kind of stuff. And that stuff can be really fun too for people.
Yeah.
It's sort of like I mean sometimes it's fun to get stuff that's like multi-brand and sometimes it's fun to have stuff that's like just really focused.
Right. I'm still I tweeted this a few days ago. I still think that there needs to be a name for that kind of Trade Mista Box, Cafe Box kind of company. And because they call themselves like what they want to call themselves, some whatever marketing term. But I do think that the industry needs to coin some kind of term to describe these companies, and I don't know what they are yet. Last thing that I thought about that came close to maybe working was like an online coffee like shopping mall, just to sort of capture both the subscription focused ones and the ones that are just kind of It's interesting though. Like at Wrecking Ball, my company, we don't work with any of those companies. We've made a choice not to. I don't personally understand. I get it from a business perspective, but when one of the values of specialty coffee is the directness, that we're working more directly, I find it puzzling that we're so eager to add more, essentially, middlemen to the value chain.
Yeah, I can understand that perspective. I will tell you that we try really hard to keep our perspective as, curious consumers who happen to write about it.
Yeah.
And as consumers, subscriptions are rad. I love shit showing up to my house. I love opening up a box and being like, wow, that's cool. Like, I'm a sucker for it. I really like it.
Yeah.
So I still have a little bit of that like joy of discovery with it that I think is fun. And that's what, for Cafe Box especially, because you never know what's going to be in it every month. It's a different roaster. It's like a different pull from that part of the world. And this is stuff that I can't go. What I don't understand is why I should be excited about a subscription service that sells coffee that's roasted down the street from me. Like, why do I care that something got like tasted in New York and like had a stamp put on it and then shipped out to me, when I can just like go walk to Stumptown from my house and go buy coffee if I want to, like that. But what's fun about something like Coffee Box is that like I cannot walk to Lagavulin Roasters in northern Norway and go and buy some shit or whatever because I don't live there.
Right. I mean, that like box subscription thing is such a thing, like not just in coffee, right? I ordered one that was full of like random Star Wars like merch. My what do you call it? My like little vanity bag thing with that I use for travel, like my toiletry bag is it looks like an X-Wing fighter. It's kind of cute. Number 4.
The huge thing in like makeup too. Huge thing in cosmetics, makeup.
Yes.
Buy a bunch of brands. Big sector.
Totally. Number 4. Everyone's a roaster now. I like this one a lot too. Yeah. Talk about that.
Well, this is something I feel like living in Portland, Oregon, I've had like a lot of direct exposure to it, because when I moved here, I moved to Portland, Oregon about 8 years ago. And when I moved here, most little cafes, there's sort of, a handful of them in every neighborhood, were serving like maybe Stumptown, or like Heart had just started, so like maybe Heart, or like from one of the other local roasters. And then like there was a couple of little local brands that had like 4 or 5 cafes, like Extracto, that was a roaster, and a couple of other little things. And then very swiftly, this sort of change happened where like now every one of these little cafes was their own roaster. And there was this like period of time where it was kind of like, maybe I liked it better when it was like from like a wholesale, like when it was from the company that had the expertise or whatever. But that was a few years ago, and I think the rest of it is sort of caught up now. But it's created this thing that's really different where like, the ability, I feel like when we started Sprudge 10 years ago, getting to be a roaster was like an achievement. Like there was a real barrier to it.
Right.
And only a few brands were, and there were a lot more cafes that serve coffee from rad roasters, but weren't roasters themselves. And
someone's calling out your pronunciation of Oregon, by the way.
I'm just joking.
He's just joking. Yeah.
That's like a local joke that you mispronounce. Because it's what they do on the national broadcasts of sports games from here. It's the national broadcasters pronounce it like unironically. So
got it.
But anyways, that's sort of changed. I feel like the barrier of entry stuff like, Pulley Collective in New York was really a major kind of out in front of like disrupting that, and then that concept has been either sort of adapted or like directly ripped off, depending on like which version you're talking about around the world. But has sort of blossomed and grown. So there's this like collaborative roasting thing. I think I say in the article, it's like WeWork, but instead of desks, it's like a 3-ton German roaster.
Right.
This is like a thing that's like really happened, and it means that from the consumer side, just like the cafe goer side, the experience of going to cafes now for what they're serving is different than it used to be. Everybody's a roaster now, or it seems like a lot of places are a roaster now.
Right. Well, it's funny. I find it really interesting that you kind of framed this talking about multi-roasters first, and that this was sort of a transition. Because, when the multi-roaster thing, so again, for those who are less kind of familiar with these terms, watching or listening to this, so a multi-roaster, a cafe that is sourcing their roasted coffee from multiple roasters as opposed to just one. Like, it's sort of seen as more traditional to just work with one. Whereas, with beer and things like that, it's like multiple taps. Did we lose you? Did you just?
No, you got me.
Did you just collapse?
No, I just had to.
This is part of the fun of this Instagram Live thing. But and not so much in criticism, but in thinking about it critically, the multi-roaster thing. Like, why are people even doing this? One of the things that came to mind for me is like, well, when specialty coffee is putting forward this narrative where the pinnacle of specialty coffee, of the work that we do is being a green coffee buyer, traveling to origin, working with farmers, selecting these coffees, et cetera, when that's held up as the pinnacle of the industry, and you can't be a green buyer, you can be a brown buyer, And so it kind of makes sense to me that it's framed together, this multi-roast thing, because it is really about like, well, if that's the value that's upheld as the pinnacle, as that's the ultimate expression of specialty coffee, then it makes sense that there be a constant tension pulling people toward roasting and pulling people toward at least a multi-roaster thing as a stopgap. I was on I'll share. I was on. There was no NDA element to this, I don't think. But I was on a phone call for an hour yesterday with this guy who was an investor, who wanted my sort of expert opinion on companies like Bellwether, which you didn't mention in here, but which is another. You actually used the word Bellwether. I noticed in there. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
No, probably no.
Yeah, but there is this company.
They're like an Oakland pulley.
No, Bellwether is their thing is essentially two-fold. One is that they have a electric, smokeless, allegedly, small roaster. It's like 3 or 5 pounds, something in that range.
Okay.
And on top of that is a green coffee sort of sourcing. Yeah. So
you know what? I to be honest with you, that's something that I think somebody else on our team is working on some kind of about it or whatever. And it was just from a not having as much touch point with it and stuff. I don't know. There's so much coffee shit these days, Nick. I don't know how anybody possibly.
I hear you.
But no, it was not intentional to.
Yeah. But I mean, my thing was like, I understand this Bellwether type deal. I don't think they're going to be very successful, actually. That's kind of what I told this guy. Frankly, just kind of putting it out there, because I think there's just too many market pressures, and I think that these companies are underestimating, or I think that they're misjudging the market demand, not in terms of the size of it, but in terms of who it's going to be. But anyway, this is all good. We're only halfway through this list, and we've already been on here for half an hour.
Yeah, and I got an 11 stop because we're just
okay. Then let's tear through. Let's see. Maybe I can even skip some of these.
Can I put a last note on that though?
Yeah.
I love multi roasters as a consumer. Like, I love that model of going somewhere to drink coffee. For the same like brand slut like geekiness that I feel like it just naturally kind of evokes. Like, I like seeing all the packaging. I like seeing a menu that's from like 4 different roasters. But it's also not a terribly practical way to run a business. And I fully understand, like, if money is an object, why you would seek a different approach in this day and age. But consumer, I love going to multi-roasters. Like, that's my favorite kind of dream cafe to go to because I like to try different stuff.
Yeah, cool. Let's skip a couple.
Okay.
Just because there's some ones that are more juicy than others. Let's go right to number 7. Instant coffee is now very okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I agree with you, but let's talk about it. So
Okay.
make the case. Instant coffee is now very okay.
Well, I think the case that gets made in the piece is that there's a couple of brands that have stepped into the market who are making specialty instant coffee. Sudden Coffee was kind of on the front part of the curve, but you also have Swift Cup and Voila, and there's others. And
I think Voila, you have to kind of do a hand thing whenever you say the word. Right.
What they have come in and done is sort of made it acceptable and okay and approachable, at least to the general public, to come in and be like, hi, there's such a thing as specialty instant coffee. It's still a little bit of a mind fuck for people, but it also makes sense. And people have been able to have the packaging look nice and set it up. Joe Coffee in New York, I think, does an especially nice job of like how they present it in their stores and how they talk about it digitally and stuff. I think they do a good job. But what's the point that kind of gets made in this section of the article is that this would be unthinkable 5 years ago. And even when these stories were coming out in 2016, like we did a big sudden story that was, maybe there was like a Finnish Vice that beat us to it by like a week or something. But
I remember.
We were something like the first, Collie really shopped that one, but we were something like the first story about it. And people were like, wow, I've never heard of this shit. And it was the same deal with Voila when it came out. People are like, wow, I can't believe people are really going to try to make this work. And it was like, people were kind of amazed that, or highly skeptical, or it just gave people feelings. And now, not even 3 years later, it's like, yeah, there's instant coffee at Reanimator. There's instant coffee at Joe. Sure, cool. Like, it's very quickly done that thing that happens to, like, a new idea becomes a trend, becomes, like, accepted, becomes mundane. Like, and that's when you really get to the utility of technology, is once it becomes mundane. And it's no longer, like, shocking. I mean, you know, it's no longer shocking that you and I are talking to each other through a phone on Instagram. It's no longer shocking that there's instant coffee at a fancy coffee store. And I think that's really interesting. I love that transition that happens for how humans interact with technology and products and stuff, where it goes from being on the bleeding edge to being very accepted and not a big deal. And for instant in specialty, that has happened lightning fast.
But there's one important... I'm with you in all that stuff, but there's one little question. Is it good?
You know, how do you
Is it good, though?
How do you define good, Nick? What does good mean?
That people think it's good.
Yeah, I think people...
I mean, I think that... I think you can answer that question like, yeah, if enough people say that it's good and they're really happy with it, then great. But I'm not seeing that. Are you seeing that?
I mean, I'm seeing more and more brands pick it up and play with it, and I don't know. I'll give you an example. We were out on like Book Tour World, and most of Book Tour World we had to fly around, but for some of the East Coast stuff we did, we were like, let's just fucking take the bus. We'll just take the boat bus. It's fine. We just fly between Philly and DC. You can take the bus. It's fine. And so we had a very early morning bus from Philly down to DC, and we'd had events the day before, an evening event with Elixir Coffee and an earlier event with Reanimator. When we were at the earlier event with Reanimator, they hooked us up with some of their specialty instant coffee. And it was like the next morning, and we were like at the Airbnb or whatever, and I think the bus left at 8 a.m., so we were like getting our shit together. It was fucking early. And I was like, you know what? And there was like just a microwave. Like there wasn't a coffee maker or anything in the place. A way to make coffee. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to microwave some fucking water and I'm going to put this thing into it and I'm going to like have some coffee before I get on this bus. And you know what?
It was good. I liked it. It was like, it did what I wanted it to do. It wasn't terrible. And like, for like the utility of like, I have a microwave and it's 6:45 in the morning and I have 5 minutes. Like, it is a better version of that than I thought possible, you know.
But here's my thing. Okay, again, I've been learning a lot about how to talk to investors in that sort of world. Okay, so there's this concept that talk about called like the total addressable market. You know, like essentially not just who could be your customer, but who realistically is going to be your customer. So you just identified the story that everyone I've ever talked to who talks about a truly positive experience with this stuff is always either on an airplane or a bus, is in some kind of perilous situation where they're just like, I was dangling from a cliff and all I had was this instant specialty and a hot water kettle. And you know what? It was actually really good in that situation. Like, if that's their target customer, is somebody in, you know, like someone said in the comments here, like, it wasn't terrible is pretty much the you know, is it good? Like, yeah, you know, kind of thing. It also kind of reminds me a little bit of for barista competitors, like the kind of trap of the signature drink development. In other words, when you have your friends and colleagues preparing for competition with you, and you're working on a signature drink for competition, for barista competition, I hear it all the time at competition where it's like the judges will hate it. Yeah. And then the competitor will come back, well, that's bullshit, because I have friends and colleagues who tasted it. They said it was good. And my answer to that is, no. They said it was good. What they really meant was it was better than it was last week. And that's not the same thing as good. You know, no one outside of that little group is going to think that that's good. I think that what these folks are skipping over, and I will include Sudden in that, this full disclaimer, Sudden, we incubated Sudden Coffee at Wrecking Ball when they first started. That Vice photo shoot thing, like, I remember when they came. They were kind of assholes, actually, those folks. They were pretty disrespectful.
Vice Finland?
Yeah, it was Finland or something like that. The folks who showed up, they were very disrespectful of our space, and we asked them to do this or not do this, and they just were like, we're gone out of here. We don't have to listen to you.
I'm shocked now.
Yeah, Vice? Asshole, are you kidding? Anyway, so the point is that, you know, brewing coffee is hard. Like, everyone who works in coffee knows that. Like, there's a small window where things kind of intersect and things are really legitimately good. And if people think that you can just automate that in that way, like, I mean, it's fallacious. It just flies in the face of everything that we know. And it's not that it's impossible, but I actually have not seen anyone come close to figuring these things out. They keep going down these weird rabbit holes that I think So anyway,
I mean, you make fair points on all that. I think that, you know, for me, I haven't had a specialty instant coffee that can replicate, you know, the 30-minute pleasure trip of a shot of espresso or whatever. But I do think that if you're going to talk about 10 things at about 150 to 250 words a clip,
sure,
stuff kind of interesting right now in coffee, it makes sense to have that be one of the 10.
I'm with you on that. We got about 10 minutes left. Let's skip to the last one.
Okay.
The fourth wave, inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, talk about it.
Yeah, you know, we have had a standing rule at Sprudge for the last 3 years that, like, if somebody pitches us on something being the fourth wave, like, out, and like we firmly question their judgment on all of pitches, because the fourth wave, this idea of fourth wave or even fifth wave. I know there was like a seminar about the fifth wave.
There's a place I've seen, I think it's in San Francisco, that's called Seventh Wave Coffee.
Seventh Wave, yeah. Far out. But it's just the idea that, like, the fourth wave is like, I'm gonna sell you something. Like,
right.
Get ready for this. The fourth wave is whatever the fuck you're gonna give me money for.
Right.
That, like, is a little bit different than
the fourth wave is me. Yeah. Right.
there's been a lot of that. There's been like a lot of that, like fourth wave being sort of abused in like ego marketing, ego branding.
Yes.
Coffee. But you guys, you and Trish, kind of found a version of it that wasn't stupid. And I remember us reading it in that Cron article that came out and being like, you know, kind of rolling our eyes because, like, fourth wave, like, we just have had, like, the fourth wave, like, moratorium, you know.
Right.
But the more I sort of thought about it, the more we kind of all talked about it as a team, and then the more I talked about it with the people at Taste and everything, the notion, the concept of the wave stuff is that it's different, right?
Right.
And it's not that it's different because your cold brew is made with non-homogenized milk, right?
Oh my God, Isabella. Yeah.
It's different because there's a fundamental difference from what came before it. And there's all these kinds of ways that you can explain that in the concept of, like, what do we mean when we say third wave in the first place, and what came different from that from the second.
Right.
Well, one of the there's so much good stuff that's happened over the last 20 years, give or take, of the third wave.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some failures too.
Yeah.
There's stuff that it didn't do or wasn't cooked into it or it did a bad job of. And one of those things has been inclusivity and diversity. And
Right.
this is something that's observable, but it's also something that you learn from talking and interviewing and immersing yourself with and being around people who have experienced it firsthand. You can be like, hey, wait, like, this feels fucking weird. I remember interviewing Ian Williams of Deadstock Coffee back in the very beginning of 2018. And I was so kind of struck by what he said. He said something like, you know, listen, I've been going to these cafes that are like white walls and like mellow music and like nobody looks like me and it's not for me and I don't fuck with that. I don't like it.
Right.
And I remember him saying that and kind of being like, well, you know, in the moment I was kind of felt like, you know, business people always say stuff like this about how their thing is different and they made the thing that was better because they couldn't come to it. But I thought about it like a lot over the course of the last year, and I've kind of taken that idea with me and traveled around with it and thought about it more, and like, he's really right. Like, it's really one of the things that I wasn't cooked into third wave. Like, it wasn't like it wasn't there. But it's starting to be, and it's especially starting to be from entrepreneurs, and a lot of whom are, you know, kind of young entrepreneurs who are building environments that feel inclusive and like they're for everyone in a way that's radically different than what the third wave cafes that like I grew up going to, that we wrote Sprudge from for forever came out. Right. Like, and that to me, far more than a new product, far more than some marketing hook or whatever the fuck people have tried to claim for fourth wave. Right. That makes sense to say that like what the fourth wave could be is like a totally different clientele. Like a totally different like access point. And we kind of try to talk about it in that Taste article to say that like that's how you're going to get more people to fall in love. Like that's how you're going to get more people from different cultures around the world. And it's such an interesting context to think about it here in America, because we really do live in a country where there's people here from all over the world. And the stupidest thing coffee could do would be to continue like building cafes for like the Finnish snowboard team to go to or whatever, and like, at the exclusion of everyone else. Right. Because you lose out not just on like customers from like a, you know, growth perspective, but like on ideas and and making cafes that are cooler and more fun and and feel urgent and like have like a necessity to them, that have like an energy to them, and that is very, very different than what the kind of standard operating procedure for third wave cafes has been, and feels different enough that you could make the argument that it represents sort of a new set of identities, or could be thought of as a new wave for where coffee is going to go next. Yeah, no, totally. I don't know if folks have seen this, but
Trish, my wife Trish, who is credited with coining third wave, gave a talk about a year and a half ago at a Tamper Tantrum event. So the whole idea of third wave coffee was absolutely inspired by the idea of third wave feminism. So, the three waves of feminism being sort of like the first wave being kind of like the suffragettes and trying to get like the right to vote and things like that. Second wave being, sort of in the 60s and on, like Gloria Steinem, Equal Rights Amendment, that idea of that type of feminism, that kind of approach to equality. And the third wave feminism in the past, 20 years being one that's more based in kind of like I can be whoever I want. The slut walk is a thing that's very much a stalwart of the third wave. But that more recently you hear more and more people talking about this idea of, we have 2 minutes left. The idea of intersectional feminism, and the idea that essentially there's so much to say about it, but we have like 1:45 left. I have a little timer on my screen.
Go a couple minutes over. It's fine.
No, the timer's the Instagram system's going to cut us off. The point is that this idea of intersectional feminism could be seen as fourth wave feminism, because the idea is that the first three waves left out fundamentally black women. Yeah. And people of other sort of intersections of identity. And so it makes sense that the fourth wave of coffee, if you were to think of such a thing, could be, and emphasis on could be the idea of diversifying those experiences and getting them out of a white normative context, which they've very firmly been, which basically is what you were saying, is they've firmly been in a very white normative context. And to diversify outside of that, it could really change everything. And I think for a lot of people, they think like, well, what could you really do? Like, are you talking about having more hip hop or like salsa music? Like you all don't even you have no idea how limited and how sort of narrow things have been. They could be a lot more diverse.
I will just say as a last thought before they cut us off. So the thing about it for me is, again, consumer perspective to this stuff, which is really important to how we try to approach writing about coffee for Sprudge, and how we try to approach writing about it for Taste too, is to say that like those places that are hitting that note of like the
10 seconds
they're the most fun. They're the best cafes. They feel the most fun. They're the ones that are the coolest to go to. They're the most fun.